The cell doors were supposed to open at 6 a.m. They didn't. Inside Block D, men pressed their faces to the narrow glass windows. Breakfast carts never rolled in. Guards never shouted count. The hallway lights stayed dim. Somewhere down the tier, a voice kept yelling for help. Then someone noticed the smell. Not smoke. Not food. Something else. And when the emergency team finally forced open cell 27, they didn't find a riot. They found a body. And a message scratched into the concrete wall. This place is the crime. 3 months earlier, Blackwater State Correctional Facility looked normal from the outside. Tall fences, concrete walls, watchtowers. It sat on the edge of a quiet town in the Midwest. A place with diners, high school football games, and a lake where families fished on weekends. Most people never thought about what happened behind those walls. They just assumed prison meant justice. Lock the door. Throw away the key. Problem solved. But Blackwater was not solving anything. It was hiding something. Officer Daniel Brooks had worked at Blackwater for 8 years. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't heroic. He was tired. He worked double shifts because the prison was short-staffed. Almost half the correctional officer positions were empty. Some quit. Some transferred. Some simply stopped showing up. Every day, Brooks walked through crowded housing units built for 80 men but holding 140. Bunk beds stacked tight. Toilets without privacy. Noise that never stopped. Men who had been waiting months, sometimes years, for court hearings. Some were serving life sentences. Some were there because they couldn't afford bail. All of them were locked inside the same walls. Inmate Marcus Hill arrived at Blackwater in early winter. 32 years old. First offense. Nonviolent financial fraud. He expected prison to be hard. He did not expect it to be chaotic. The first thing he noticed was the noise. Shouting. Metal doors slamming. Arguments over space. The second thing he noticed was the smell. Sweat. Bleach. Mold. And something else that lingered in the air. Hopelessness. Hill kept to himself. He read books. He wrote letters to his sister. He tried to stay invisible. But invisibility in prison is fragile. One afternoon in the yard, a fight broke out near the basketball court. It started over a phone call schedule. Within seconds, it spread. Not because everyone was angry. Because everyone was tense. Officers rushed in late. Pepper spray filled the air. Men coughed and stumbled. Hill watched from the edge of the yard. He saw something strange. The cameras pointed toward the fight weren't moving. They weren't zooming. They were frozen. Blackwater had installed a new surveillance system the year before. High-definition cameras. Digital storage. Remote monitoring. On paper, it was state-of-the-art. But inside the control room, Officer Brooks knew the truth. Half the cameras glitched daily. Some units had blind spots that never got fixed. Maintenance reports were filed. Budget approvals were delayed. The prison was overcrowded and underfunded. And everyone knew it. But no one wanted to say it out loud. At night, Block D was different. The air felt heavier. Lights dimmed. Voices whispered. Hill's cellmate, an older man named Curtis Lane, had been inside for 14 years. Prison ain't about bars, Lane told him quietly one night. It's about pressure. What do you mean? Hill asked. Lane tapped the concrete wall. They pack us tight. Cut programs. Cut visits. Cut mental health. Pressure builds. Then they act surprised when something explodes. Hill didn't respond. But he started paying attention. Over the next weeks, strange patterns appeared. Meals arrived late. Medical requests disappeared. A man in the next tier screamed for help one night. He was having chest pain. Officers didn't respond for almost an hour. By the time they opened the door, he was unconscious. They said he survived. No one saw him again. Hill began writing notes. Dates. Times. Incidents. He didn't know why. Maybe he just needed proof that he wasn't imagining it. One day in the library, he overheard 2 inmates talking in low voices. They cut staff again, one said. Yeah, but population's the same. That math don't work. Hill felt something click in his mind. Overcrowding wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Officer Brooks felt it too. He worked 16-hour shifts. He missed his daughter's birthday. He responded to 3 fights in one day. One evening, he found himself standing alone in Block D during count. Too many inmates. Not enough officers. If something happened, he knew backup would take minutes. In prison, minutes are long. Very long. Then came the lockdown. It started with a rumor. Someone said a contraband phone had been found. Then someone else said drugs were moving through the kitchen. Within hours, the warden ordered full lockdown. No yard. No visits. No programs. 23 hours a day inside cells built for two, but holding three. Pressure. Lane's words echoed in Hill's mind. Pressure builds. During lockdown, tempers changed. Small arguments became serious threats. Sleep became rare. Mental health requests doubled. But there weren't enough counselors. There weren't enough officers. There wasn't enough space. Hill noticed something else. Curtis Lane stopped eating. He stared at the wall. He whispered to himself, "I can't breathe in here," Lane muttered one night. "There's air," Hill said softly. "Not that kind." 2 weeks into lockdown, the power flickered in Block D. Emergency lights clicked on. Then off. Then on again. The hallway cameras rebooted. When they came back online, one camera feed was missing. Cell 27. The system showed a black screen. Maintenance said it was a glitch. It would be fixed in the morning. But morning never came the way it was supposed to. At 5:45 a.m., Officer Brooks prepared for morning count. The hallway felt quiet. Too quiet. He walked past cell 23, 24, 25, 26. When he reached 27, he paused. He couldn't see movement through the small window. "Count," he called out. No response. He knocked on the door. Still nothing. His radio crackled. Another officer reported the same silence in a nearby cell. Brooks felt the air change. That heavy feeling again. Pressure. The response team arrived. Keys turned. Metal scraped. The door to cell 27 opened slowly. Hill stood at the end of the tier, watching. The officers stepped inside. Then froze. Someone whispered, "Call medical." Hill couldn't see clearly from where he stood. But he saw one thing clearly. Curtis Lane was not standing. He was not breathing. And carved into the concrete beside his bunk were the words, "This place is the crime." The prison administration moved fast. They called it a medical emergency. They said Lane had pre-existing conditions. They said everything was under control. But inmates had seen the black camera feed. They knew about the delays during lockdown. They knew about the unanswered medical requests. They knew about the pressure. Hill felt anger rising in the unit. Not loud. Not violent. Quiet. Focused. Whispers moved from cell to cell. They ignored him. They knew. They don't care. Officer Brooks couldn't shake the image. He had walked that tier dozens of times. He had heard Lane's cough. He had seen the medical slips stack up. He had filed reports. Nothing changed. That night, Brooks checked the surveillance logs. The missing footage from cell 27 wasn't just a glitch. The camera had been manually disabled. At 2:13 a.m., by someone with administrative access, Brooks stared at the screen. Administrative access meant upper control room clearance. Not inmates. Not regular officers. Someone above him. He felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just overcrowding. This wasn't just pressure. This was something else. The next morning, before count, the prison sirens blared unexpectedly. All units on emergency hold. No movement. No explanation. Hill stood at his cell door. Officers ran past. Boots hitting concrete. Radios buzzing. From the far end of Block D, smoke drifted into the hallway. Not from a riot. Not from a fire in a cell. From the control room. And as alarms echoed through Blackwater State Correctional Facility, Officer Brooks received a single message on his secure terminal: "Stop digging." He looked up toward the smoke rising above the tier. Somewhere inside that prison, someone was erasing something. And Curtis Lane's death was only the beginning. The smoke from the control room did not last long. It was contained in 12 minutes. That is what the official report would later say. Electrical malfunction. Minor server damage. Routine disruption. But Officer Daniel Brooks knew better. He had seen the message on his screen. Stop digging. And servers do not send warnings. People do. By mid-morning, the prison was on full lockdown again. No movement. No phones. No showers. No explanations. Inside Block D, the air felt heavier than before. Marcus Hill stood at his cell door, watching officers carry out black storage boxes from the administration hallway. Computers. Hard drives. Evidence. Or maybe the erasing of it. Curtis Lane's bunk was already stripped. Mattress gone. Sheets gone. Concrete scrubbed clean. Except for one thing. The carved words on the wall. They had tried to sand it down. But you could still see it if the light hit the concrete just right. "This place is the crime." In the staff break room, whispers replaced conversation. 2 officers had been sent home without explanation. One of them worked the overnight shift near Block D. Brooks checked his phone. News outlets were reporting Lane's death as a medical incident under review. Nothing about the disabled camera. Nothing about the lockdown. Nothing about the smoke in the control room. It was already being buried. Marcus Hill had stopped writing letters. He started writing notes again instead. Dates, times, names. He memorized which cameras worked and which didn't. He noticed which officers looked nervous, which ones avoided eye contact, which ones suddenly refused to answer questions. The prison had changed. Not loudly, but quietly, like a building holding its breath. 3 days later, investigators from the State Department arrived. Suits, clipboards, polite smiles. They toured the facility quickly, talked to the warden, spoke with selected inmates, carefully chosen inmates. Not Marcus Hill, not anyone from Cell 27's tier. Officer Brooks requested to speak privately with the investigators. He was denied. Chain of command, he was told. He understood what that meant. Stay quiet. That night, Hill's new cellmate arrived. A young man named Isaiah Cole, 24 years old, picked up on a probation violation. Nervous, thin, eyes that moved constantly. They said someone died in here, Isaiah whispered. Hill nodded. They say it was natural. Hill looked at the wall. Nothing about this place is natural. Across the prison, something else was happening. Programs were being cut. Education classes suspended. Library hours reduced. Staff meetings increased. Security tightened, but only in visible ways. Metal detectors, random searches, more counts. But mental health staff remained short. Medical requests still piled up. Pressure. Lane's word echoed again. Pressure. Officer Brooks finally gained access to what remained of the server logs. Most data from the night of Lane's death was gone, corrupted during the electrical malfunction. But one fragment remained. A timestamp. 2:11 a.m. administrative login. 2 minutes before the camera in cell 27 went dark. The login ID belonged to Assistant Warden Charles Avery. Brooks felt his pulse in his throat. Avery was known as careful, calm, untouchable. He had worked at Blackwater for 20 years. He knew every blind spot in the building, every budget cut, every audit loophole. Brooks printed the fragment quietly and slipped it into his locker. He didn't know who he could trust. Marcus Hill began noticing Isaiah's behavior. Isaiah barely slept. He jumped at every noise. He told Hill something strange. They asked me questions, Isaiah whispered one night. Who did? Administration. They asked what Lane said before he died. What did you tell them? That he said nothing. Hill studied him carefully. Did he say something? Isaiah hesitated, then nodded. He said, they turned it off. Hill felt cold. The camera. Lane had known. 2 weeks after Lane's death, another incident occurred. This time in Block B. An inmate named Raymond Torres was found unconscious in his cell. Official cause, suspected overdose. But Torres had been in protective custody. No known history of drug use. And again, the camera covering his cell malfunctioned for 19 minutes during the night. 19 minutes. Long enough for something to happen. Not long enough to prove it. Whispers spread through the prison faster than official memos. 2 deaths. 2 camera failures. 1 assistant warden with administrative login access. Pressure was no longer building. It was cracking. Officer Brooks approached Assistant Warden Avery directly. Carefully. Sir, I was reviewing the system logs from the night of the outage. Avery didn't look up from his desk. Maintenance already filed that as resolved. There was an administrative login 2 minutes before the camera dropped. Avery finally raised his eyes. Calm. Flat. You're overstepping, officer. I'm concerned about documentation accuracy. Avery stood slowly. Be concerned about your shift coverage instead. The message was clear. Stop digging. Inside Block D, something shifted. Inmates stopped arguing. Stopped fighting. They watched instead. Listened. Noticed patterns. When guards walked by, conversations ended. When administrators entered the tier, silence spread like a wave. Hill realized something important. This wasn't chaos. It was fear. And fear can organize people quietly. Then came the audit announcement. The state would conduct a full review of Blackwater. It sounded promising. But Hill overheard 2 officers talking. They'll announce the date in advance. So they'll clean it up first. Exactly. Pressure would be hidden. Logs adjusted. Cells repaired. Reports rewritten. By the time auditors arrived, everything would look stable. That word again. Stable. Isaiah stopped sleeping entirely. One night, he grabbed Hill's arm. They told me to keep quiet, he said. Who? A man in a suit. Said I don't want problems. What kind of problems? Isaiah didn't answer. But his hands were shaking. Officer Brooks went home that weekend and couldn't sit still. He stared at the printed server fragment. 2:11 a.m. Assistant Warden login. He opened his laptop. He began drafting an anonymous complaint to an external oversight group. He hesitated before sending it. He thought of his daughter, his mortgage, his badge. Then he remembered Lane's carved message. He hit send. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. News broke outside the prison. A local journalist published an article questioning camera failures at Blackwater. 2 unexplained outages. 2 inmate deaths. The story was small, but it was public. Inside the prison, tension exploded. Assistant Warden Avery called an emergency staff meeting. "We are under scrutiny," he said evenly. "We will maintain professionalism." No one mentioned the article directly, but everyone had read it. That night, Hill was woken by shouting down the tier. Not a fight, not an argument. An officer's voice. "Medical." Now, Hill stepped to his door. Isaiah was on the floor, unconscious. No visible injury. No noise. Just still. Hill's heart pounded. He looked up at the hallway camera. The red recording light was off. Again, the door opened. Medical staff rushed in. Isaiah was carried out on a stretcher. Hill never saw him return. The next morning, administration announced a transfer. Safety concerns. No details. No location. Just gone. Hill felt something shift inside him. Lane. Torres. Now Isaiah. Each one connected by silence. By broken cameras. By quiet threats. By erased logs. This was not about discipline. It was not about order. It was about control. Control of narrative. Control of truth. Officer Brooks checked the system again that night. Another fragment survived the purge. 2:03 a.m. administrative login. Assistant Warden Avery. Camera disabled in Block D. Again, Brooks no longer felt uncertain. He felt afraid. Not of inmates. Not of riots. But of something more organized. More deliberate. Someone wasn't just covering mistakes. Someone was choosing when not to watch. The audit team arrived a week later. Clean uniforms. Fresh paint. Working cameras. Calm inmates carefully selected for interviews. Hill was not chosen. Brooks was not interviewed. Assistant Warden Avery guided the tour personally. Everything looked stable. Controlled. Normal. Until one auditor paused near Block D. He looked up at the ceiling. "Strange," he muttered. "What is?" Avery asked smoothly. "This camera model has an internal backup battery," the auditor said. "Even during power outages, it should record locally." Avery's smile tightened. The auditor continued. "So if footage is missing, it wasn't electrical." Silence stretched in the hallway. Hill watched from inside his cell. Officer Brooks felt his pulse race. The auditor turned toward Avery. "Can we review the backup storage logs?" Avery's expression did not change, but his voice dropped slightly. "Of course." As the audit team followed him toward the control room, alarms suddenly blared again. Not smoke this time. A full facility security breach alert. Doors sealed. Systems locked. Screens went black. Inside the control room, every monitor shut down at once. And on Brooks' handheld device, a final message appeared. "System reset in progress." Somewhere above them, someone was wiping everything. Again. And this time, it wasn't subtle. It was desperate. The screens went black. Every monitor in the control room. Every hallway feed. Every cell block camera. Dark. The emergency lights flickered red across the ceiling, washing the prison in a slow, warning glow. Officer Daniel Brooks stood frozen, staring at his handheld device. System reset in progress. Assistant Warden Charles Avery did not look surprised. He stepped back from the main console calmly. "Technical malfunction," he said to the auditors. But this time, no one believed him. The reset took 11 minutes. Longer than any outage before. When the screens came back on, the system logs were clean. Too clean. No trace of administrative access. No trace of disabled cameras. No trace of missing footage. It was as if the past few weeks had never happened. Except for one thing. The auditor who had asked about the backup batteries was still standing there. And he wasn't smiling anymore. Outside Blackwater, the journalist who published the first article had received something unexpected. An anonymous email. 3 attachments. Partial server fragments. Timestamps. Administrative logins. Camera failures tied to specific cells. The sender name was simple. Concerned officer. Inside Block D, Marcus Hill felt the air change again. This time, it wasn't just pressure. It was exposure. Guards moved differently. Faster. Less confident. Whispers were no longer quiet. They're in trouble. They're scared. Hill didn't celebrate. He understood something important. When systems feel threatened, they don't collapse quietly. They tighten. Assistant Warden Avery called another meeting. This time, his tone was sharper. "We are facing false narratives," he said. "Outside forces do not understand prison operations." No one mentioned the email. No one mentioned the journalist's second article that had just gone live. The headline was simple: "Pattern of camera failures linked to inmate deaths at." The state governor announced a formal investigation. Not an internal review. An independent inquiry. External forensic analysts. External oversight. The word spread through the prison like electricity. Independent. That meant someone outside the chain of command. Someone harder to silence. Officer Brooks was called into a private office. Not by Avery. By the lead external investigator. A woman named Dr. Elena Martinez. Calm. Direct. She slid printed server fragments across the table. "You sent these," she said. It wasn't a question. Brooks swallowed. "Yes." "Why?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because the cameras weren't failing." Dr. Martinez studied him carefully. "Were the deaths preventable?" Brooks looked down. "Some of them might have been." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Real. Investigators began pulling full hardware backups. Not from the prison servers. From the manufacturer's cloud storage. Something Avery had either forgotten or assumed no one would check. The backup battery system had stored local footage. Even during the blackouts. The files were fragmented. Damaged. But not erased. Forensic teams worked for days. Rebuilding video piece by piece. Like putting together a broken mirror. Marcus Hill was finally interviewed. He spoke slowly. Carefully. He described Lane's breathing that night. The unanswered medical request. The delay in response. Isaiah's fear. Torres' sudden silence. He did not accuse. He described. Sometimes truth is louder when it is simple. The footage reconstruction was incomplete, but it showed enough. In cell 27, Curtis Lane was visible pacing at 1:58 a.m. He pressed the emergency button repeatedly. No response. At 2:09 a.m., he sat on his bunk, holding his chest. At 2:11 a.m., the hallway camera angle shifted slightly. Not a glitch. A manual remote adjustment. At 2:13 a.m., the feed went dark. When it returned at 2:28 a.m., Lane was on the floor. Medical response did not arrive until 2:47 a.m., 34 minutes after he pressed for help. In Block B, Torres was seen speaking to someone outside his cell. A shadow. An officer not fully visible. At 2:03 a.m., camera disabled. When it returned, Torres was unresponsive. No struggle. No visible injury. Just silence. The pattern was clear. Cameras weren't failing randomly. They were being redirected. Disabled. Timed. Not to hide violence, but to hide neglect. To hide delay. To hide inaction. The worst crime inside Blackwater was not chaos. It was indifference. Assistant Warden Avery was placed on administrative leave. He did not resist. He walked out calmly. No handcuffs. No dramatic arrest. Just a quiet exit through a side door. But the story did not end there. Because Avery was not the only one with access. The investigation widened. Emails surfaced. Budget reports. Internal memos requesting additional medical staff, denied due to cost. Maintenance reports about faulty alert systems, marked low priority. Blackwater was overcrowded by 62%. Funding had not increased in 5 years. Staff positions remained unfilled. Training hours reduced. Mental health programs cut. It wasn't just one decision. It was years of decisions. Stacked. Layered. Ignored. Pressure. Marcus Hill was transferred to another facility. Not as punishment. As protection. Before leaving, he stood one last time inside Block D. The words on Lane's wall had finally been fully removed. Concrete patched. Painted over. But Hill knew something. Walls can be repainted. Records can be wiped. But patterns leave marks. Officer Brooks remained. He testified under oath. He described the pressure. The staffing shortages. The culture of silence. He admitted something else too. "We stopped seeing inmates as people," he said quietly. "We started seeing them as numbers." The independent investigation concluded months later. The findings were public. Blackwater had systemic failures. Delayed medical responses. Intentional camera manipulation to avoid documenting non-compliance with safety protocols. Chronic understaffing that created unsafe conditions. Assistant Warden Avery resigned permanently. 2 other administrators were dismissed. Policy reforms were ordered. More funding approved. Mandatory external monitoring installed. But something in the report stood out more than anything else. A single sentence. The primary issue at Blackwater was not individual cruelty, but institutional neglect. Prison life is often described in simple words: punishment, security, discipline. But inside Blackwater, the real problem had been something quieter. When systems are stretched too thin, when oversight is weak, when budgets matter more than breathing, when silence protects reputations instead of people, neglect becomes normal, and normal becomes dangerous. Months later, Dr. Martinez visited the now renovated Block D. New cameras, more staff, improved medical response times. On paper, it was fixed, but she stood there a long moment, staring at the concrete wall where Lane's message once lived. She had read it in the reports. She had seen the photograph before it was removed. This place is the crime. She understood what he meant. Prison is meant to remove freedom, not humanity. When safety systems are ignored, when transparency is avoided, when pressure is allowed to build without relief, the building itself becomes part of the harm, not through monsters, through maintenance reports ignored, through staffing cuts approved, through warnings dismissed. Officer Brooks now trains new recruits. He tells them something simple. Watch the cameras, he says. But more importantly, answer the button. Because sometimes what is wrong with prison life is not dramatic, not explosive, not violent. It is the slow, quiet failure to respond. The quiet belief that those behind bars do not deserve urgency. And that belief can cost lives. Blackwater still stands. Fences still tall. Gates still locked. But now there are external monitors reviewing footage daily. Medical response audits. Public transparency reports. Change did not happen overnight. And it did not happen without loss. Curtis Lane's name appears in the final report. Not as a headline. Not as a scandal. But as a reminder. A reminder that prison is not supposed to erase people. It is supposed to hold them accountable. Safely. Humanely. Responsibly. Because when cameras are turned off, when voices are ignored, when pressure is allowed to rise without release, the question is no longer about one death, or two, or three. The real question becomes, if no one is watching, what else is happening behind the walls? And more importantly, who will make sure the doors open on time tomorrow? Thanks for watching. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe for more crime documentary.